The word hung in the air like static before a storm. Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly forward, voice low, each syllable precise enough to cut glass. "Senator, with all due respect, you don't get to rewrite pain just because it makes you uncomfortable." The sound hit the room differently. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Across the table, Tim Scott blinked, his practiced smile faltering, fingers tightening around the pen he'd been twirling. The moderator tried to recover. "Congresswoman, if we could," but it was too late. The air had shifted. A murmur rippled through the studio audience, half gasp, half applause stifled by disbelief. The control booth missed a cue. The red live indicator on the corner of the screen flickered as if unsure whether it wanted to keep showing this in real time. Scott attempted to respond. Something about optimism, about how America had moved beyond the bitterness of the past. But Crockett's expression didn't change. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, surgical. And for the first time all evening, Scott looked small. On social feeds, the moment was already mutating. Clips replayed in slow motion. Hashtags began to form like sparks. Crockett roast. Tim Scott meltdown. Receipts on deck. TikTok stitched her line into remixes over pulsing beats. Twitter, no, the entire internet, was dissecting that 10-second exchange frame by frame. The commentators would later call it the quiet roast heard around the nation. But inside the studio, no one was thinking about headlines yet. There was only silence, the heavy cinematic kind that means the truth has just been spoken out loud. Crockett leaned back, unhurried. Her tone never broke above conversational, but the authority in it left no room for spin. Viewers at home felt it, something shifting, a kind of equilibrium breaking. For years, the conversation about progress had been controlled by polished monologues and applause lines. Tonight, one calm, pointed sentence had shattered that rhythm. Tim Scott's jaw flexed. The host shuffled papers. Someone coughed in the distance. And then, cut. The feed froze on a still frame. Crockett's eyes focused, Scott mid-blink, the lower third glowing, "Live." How did we get here? To understand how this calm storm erupted and why millions saw it as a turning point, we have to go back to where this debate began. The night began with smiles polished enough to blind the cameras. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "America at a crossroads, race, opportunity, and leadership." A round table meant for dialogue, not drama, or so the producers promised. Under the lights, Tim Scott looked every bit the seasoned statesman, crisp suit, confident grin, the voice of practiced optimism. "We've come a long way," he said smoothly. "I'm living proof that this country works if you choose to see opportunity instead of oppression." Applause rippled from a few rows of the audience, exactly as planned. This was his territory, controlled, rehearsed, safe. Across the table, Jasmine Crockett sat still. She didn't fidget or nod. She listened the way a storm studies the horizon before it moves. Scott continued, warming to his own narrative. "We can't keep teaching young people to see themselves as victims," he said, gesturing for effect. "That mindset does more harm than any policy ever could. America's problem isn't racism, it's pessimism." The moderator smiled, relieved at the civility. The producers exchanged approving glances behind the glass. This was the clip they'd hoped for. The good black conservative soothing the conscience of middle America. But there was something underneath it. An unease you could feel even through the screen. The audience's polite applause began to sound uncertain, thinner with each repetition. People were listening but not agreeing. Somewhere deep in the crowd, a young woman folded her arms, shaking her head. Crockett finally spoke, voice soft, not yet confrontational. "Senator," she said, "you believe optimism is the cure. But whose optimism are we talking about, the ones who benefit or the ones still waiting to be seen?" The words were light, almost invisible, but they lingered in the air long after she stopped speaking. The moderator glanced nervously between them. Scott smiled again, tighter this time. "Well," he chuckled, "I think facts speak for themselves." Crockett didn't answer. She just tilted her head, a quiet calculation behind her calm. The camera caught it, an expression that told viewers everywhere that something was coming. No one knew that within minutes. The tone would shift, and the so-called veteran would be the one on the defensive. Tim Scott's story had always been polished to perfection. The son of a single mother, rising from poverty to power, he carried himself as living proof that the American dream was still intact. Every campaign ad leaned on it. The grainy photos of his childhood home, the swelling strings, the tagline, "From Cotton to Congress." It was the kind of narrative America loved to believe in. He'd told it so many times that it began to sound less like memory and more like myth. On stage at rallies, he would beam as crowds nodded in approval. "My success isn't a miracle," he'd say. "It's America's promise." The applause would surge like a standing ovation at a church revival. He'd smile, hold for effect, and add, "If I can do it, anyone can." But that line, once his golden ticket, carried a quieter cost. In conservative ballrooms, it earned him thunder. In community halls back home, it earned silence. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether to clap or cry, because what sounded like triumph to some felt like erasure to others. There were the old clips, the ones that resurfaced every election season. Scott standing beside party leaders, nodding as they praised him for rising above grievance politics. He'd smile, eyes steady, while pundits called him the proof racism is a thing of the past. The camera always caught the moment just before he looked away. For years, that was his armor, composure, faith, and the quiet confidence that the system had been fair to him. But what was unspoken in his speeches was the truth millions of others lived. Those who worked just as hard, dreamed just as big, but never got the same second chance. It wasn't that his story wasn't real. It was that it wasn't the whole story. And the more he insisted it was, the more fragile it became. Tim Scott built a brand on calm denial, graceful, articulate, disarming. He didn't shout his beliefs. He smiled them. But tonight, that calm was about to meet its match. Because while Scott spoke of colorblind ideals, Jasmine Crockett was quietly loading the facts that would break that illusion. Before she ever sat beneath the bright lights of national television, Jasmine Crockett had learned to fight in rooms where no cameras rolled. In Dallas County's crowded courtrooms, she was the voice for people who couldn't afford one, the single mother facing eviction, the young man caught in a system that never forgave, the grandmother charged for protesting in her own neighborhood. She wore thrift store suits, carried folders heavy with handwritten notes, and spoke with the kind of conviction that made even jaded judges pause. Back then, she didn't have titles or a staff. What she had was stamina and a belief that the law was supposed to mean something. Every cross-examination became its own small rebellion. She'd stand in front of prosecutors twice her age and calmly unravel their arguments thread by thread until the courtroom fell quiet. Her gift wasn't volume. It was precision. Even then, she understood that power didn't need to shout. It only needed to be sure. When she stepped into politics, it wasn't ambition that drove her. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes from watching the same injustices recycle with new faces and friendlier slogans. She ran for state office because she was tired of defending the broken. She wanted to fix what was breaking them. And when she finally arrived in Washington, her fire didn't dim. It focused. In hearings, she became the questioner no one wanted to face. Calm, methodical, almost surgical, she turned simple clarifications into demolitions of deceit. One clip showed her holding a witness's gaze while saying, "I'm not asking for emotion. I'm asking for evidence." Another captured her flipping through documents with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew the ending. Those moments began to spread online. Her tone wasn't performative. It was deliberate. The internet dubbed her Ms. Receipts, a mix of reverence and warning. Her presence became a genre of its own. No yelling, no chaos, just facts, delivered so cleanly they cut. But behind that composure was a long memory. She'd grown up watching women like her be told to soften their edges, to sound grateful. She'd learned early that calm wasn't compliance, it was control. So when she took a seat across from Tim Scott that night, she carried not just talking points, but the weight of every person told to stay polite while being ignored. Her team had warned her it might get tense. "He's smooth," they'd said. "Don't let him box you in with optimism." She'd smiled and replied, "I don't box, I balance." On the day of the debate, she walked into the studio early, greeting staff by name, steady as ever. No entourage, no flash. Just a folder under her arm, notes barely glanced at. The makeup artist asked if she was nervous. "Not nervous," she said, "just ready." The lights dimmed, the cameras blinked to life, and the small studio transformed into a national stage. Across from her sat a man praised for his calm. But Crockett knew there was a difference between calm born from comfort and calm born from conviction. One bends to keep peace, the other stands to make it. As the moderator introduced the topic, she drew a slow breath. This wasn't about scoring points or trending hashtags. It was about holding space for truth that had been talked over too long. She knew this wasn't just another debate. It was a chance to show that truth doesn't have to shout to be heard. And when the moment came, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. The opening exchange felt rehearsed, almost harmless. Scott leaned into his practiced rhythm, every word landing with the polish of a campaign stump speech. "We've made more progress than any nation on earth," he declared, his voice full of confidence. "We can't keep teaching people to see themselves as victims. Victimhood keeps people stuck." He smiled, the kind of smile meant to cue applause. A few claps echoed politely, but they faded faster than expected. The room wasn't convinced. It was curious Crockett didn't move. Her stillness was louder than any reaction. She let the moment hang, every second sharpening the silence. Then, with the composure of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do, she said quietly, "Senator, with all due respect, progress isn't proof of perfection." The words were calm, but the impact was seismic. The host blinked. The audience straightened in their seats. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a line that reframed the entire debate. Scott chuckled, trying to lighten the weight she'd just dropped. "Now, Congresswoman, let's not get emotional," he said, the tone wrapped in patronizing ease. That was the mistake. Crockett's gaze didn't shift. Her voice stayed even, but something in the air snapped taut. "Emotional?" she repeated, almost whispering it, as though testing the word. Then she smiled, a small, knowing curve that said more than a paragraph ever could. The audience felt it before she said another word. The energy flipped. What had started as a lecture was turning into reckoning. The contrast between them was electric. His insistence on control, her refusal to play his game. Scott tried again, filling the space with talking points, about unity, about faith, about hard work. But each word felt thinner now, less certain. The camera caught the way he avoided her eyes, how she never broke contact. She waited, patient as a tide. Then, just as he finished his last line, she leaned forward slightly, voice smooth and deliberate. The crowd sensed it, the build, the breath before the break, and then the line that would explode across every feed in America. Crockett didn't rush. She let the quiet settle, each second stretching thin enough to hum. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, steady, clear, unflinching. "Senator," she began, "you talk about progress as if it's proof we've arrived. But progress isn't a destination. It's maintenance. It's work that never ends." Scott leaned back, smiling as if to say he'd heard it all before. But the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She continued, voice even softer now, each phrase landing like truth disguised as calm. "You say victimhood keeps people stuck. I say denial keeps a country blind, because you can't fix what you won't face, and you can't heal from a wound you refuse to name." The moderator opened his mouth, then thought better of it. The audience had gone still again, this time not from shock but from attention. Every camera tightened its focus. Crockett didn't look at the lens. She looked straight at him. "You've built a brand on being the exception," she said, "and I respect your story. But exceptions don't erase the rule. They prove it. You made it through a door most people still find locked. Scott adjusted his tie. A small gesture, but the kind that reveals more than words. And that's fine, she went on. But the problem comes when you turn around and tell the people still knocking that the door was never closed. A murmur rolled through the audience. She didn't pause to let it swell. You can't claim to represent progress while denying the pain that built it, Senator. The camera caught it perfectly, Scott's jaw tightening, his forced smile stretching like glass under heat. The moderator glanced down at his cards, pretending to read something. The studio lights seemed to burn a little brighter. Crockett leaned back, unhurried. See, for some of us, discipline isn't about pretending the past is over. It's about surviving it and still choosing to believe in better. That's what dignity looks like. Not the denial of struggle, but the strength to keep showing up despite it. Scott exhaled sharply, a half laugh. That's a poetic way to say we disagree, he managed. Crockett smiled. Poetry is truth with rhythm, Senator. Maybe it's time we start listening to its beat again. The room shifted. The energy was hers now. You could almost feel the balance of power change hands in real time. She straightened her papers, as if wrapping up a routine point, and said with final precision, Dignity isn't weakness, Senator. It's discipline, and some of us had to learn that the hard way. The silence afterward was thick enough to hold. Then came the sound of someone exhaling audibly, a nervous laugh from the back row, and finally applause. It started tentative, then built, slow, strong, unstoppable. By the time the show ended, Twitter had already detonated. Clips looped endlessly, the look, the line, the moment he had no comeback. TikTok crowned it the calm roast of 2025. Hashtags flooded every corner of the feed. Crockett facts, Grace with receipts, dignity wins. Headlines screamed from digital billboards and news banners alike, Crockett dismantles denial on live TV. Within minutes, it wasn't just political, it was cultural. The morning shows called it the calmest knockout in debate history. Late-night hosts replayed it with gleeful precision, freezing the exact second Scott's confidence cracked. One quipped, that wasn't a debate, it was an intervention. The studio audience howled. On social feeds, the clip spread like a rhythm people couldn't stop replaying. Activists turned her quotes into graphics, white text on bold red backgrounds. Progress isn't proof of perfection. Dignity is discipline. Hashtags flooded timelines. Us Crockett roast. Grace with receipts, our dignity wins. The comments pulsed with pride, relief, vindication. Celebrities joined in. Musicians quoted her words before performances. Athletes called her a voice that hits harder than any punch. Even some conservatives, quietly, admitted on air that she handled herself with undeniable composure. Scott's own party scrambled. First silence, then spin, then subtle distance. The same commentators who once praised his measured optimism now called his answers out of step with reality. In barbershops and classrooms, on college campuses and community podcasts, the conversation deepened. People weren't just celebrating Crockett. They were unpacking the layers she exposed. Teachers replayed her segment in civics classes. Church leaders wove her words into sermons about truth and accountability. It wasn't just a viral debate anymore. It was a mirror held up to a nation still arguing over its own reflection. Crockett had cracked something open, a sense that the polished narratives of post-racial progress couldn't survive contact with unflinching truth. And yet, amid the cheering, the retweets, the merch drops, and the reaction clips, one question lingered, quieter, heavier. What made this exchange feel so different? Why did this moment, this calm, razor-edged, meticulously delivered truth, cut through where 1,000 arguments hadn't? As the applause faded and the headlines multiplied, that question hovered in the digital air, waiting for an answer that would go far beyond politics. The screen lingers on a single frame, Crockett's eyes steady, her voice echoing in memory. Dignity isn't weakness, Senator. It's discipline, and some of us had to learn that the hard way. The applause swells, captured in slow motion, every clap and murmur stretching into a cinematic beat. Hashtags flood the bottom of the screen. Shock Crockett roast, shock Grace with receipts. Dignity wins, the digital pulse of a moment that refuses to fade. She didn't just win a debate. She reminded millions that grace under pressure is the real power, that composure can dismantle arrogance, and that truth delivered with care resonates far deeper than fury ever could. Across timelines and screens, viewers felt it, not as spectators, but participants in a moment that validated their own desire for honesty, fairness, and courage. Every retweet, every stitched clip, every headline was a ripple from that single, unwavering moment. Social media didn't just amplify the exchange, it transformed it into a cultural conversation about integrity, about what it means to stand firm while others shout, and about the quiet victories that shape a nation's conscience. Now the invitation extends to the audience. If you believe in calm truth over chaos, in dignity over spectacle, in reasoned courage over empty bravado, share this story. Because the next viral moment of clarity, the next instance where composure triumphs over performance, might just start with you. The final frame freezes. Crockett's subtle smile, eyes reflecting both determination and compassion, the embodiment of disciplined strength. Slowly, the words fade in across the screen. Dignity always wins. It is more than a tagline. It is a call, a reminder, and a challenge. That even in an age obsessed with noise, the quiet truth, delivered with courage and grace, resonates. It lingers. It inspires. It changes the conversation. The camera pulls back, leaving the audience with one last thought. Moments like this are rare, but they are powerful. And when the world expects spectacle, it is calm conviction that leaves the most enduring mark. Dignity always wins. And if you carry that forward, if you speak it, live it, and share it, you become part of a story far bigger than a debate, far bigger than a clip, far bigger than any viral moment.